Part 1. The capture Dr. Elena Vasquez gripped the controls of her small research ship as warning lights flashed red across the dashboard. The engine made terrible grinding sounds and thick smoke filled the cabin. She had been alone in space for 3 weeks, studying planets that no human had ever visited before. Come on, Elena whispered to her ship. She pressed buttons and pulled levers, but nothing worked. The green planet below grew larger and larger through her window. She was going to crash. Elena strapped herself into her seat and held on tight. The ship hit the top of the jungle trees with a loud crack. Branches broke and leaves flew everywhere. The ship bounced once, twice, then slammed into the ground with a boom that shook the entire forest. When Elena opened her eyes, her head hurt badly. Blood trickled down her face. Smoke filled the cabin, and sparks jumped from broken wires. She unbuckled her seatbelt and crawled toward the emergency exit. The door was stuck, but she kicked it hard until it opened. Elena tumbled out onto soft, wet dirt. The air smelled like flowers and rotting leaves. Strange bird calls echoed through the thick jungle around her. Giant trees with purple bark stretched, up so high she could not see their tops. Bright orange vines hung down like curtains. She limped back to her ship to get her supplies. Most of her equipment was broken, but she found her backpack with some food, water, and medical supplies. Her universal translator device was cracked and sparking. When she tried to turn it on, it only made beeping sounds and showed scrambled words on its screen. Great, Elena said to herself. Now I can't talk to anyone I might meet. She had studied many alien languages, but only from books and recordings. She had never actually spoken to real aliens before. Elena was a scientist who studied how different species lived and behaved. This was supposed to be her first big discovery mission. Elena cleaned the cut on her forehead and ate a small energy bar. She needed to find water and shelter before it got dark. The jungle was full of strange sounds, clicking, chirping, and low growling noises that made her nervous. She had walked for maybe an hour when she heard something new, voices. Not human. Voices, but definitely voices talking to each other. Elena crept quietly toward the sound, hiding behind the massive tree trunks. Through the leaves, she saw them, 6 tall reptilian creatures walking in a line through the jungle. They had green and brown scales that shimmered in the sunlight. Bright feathers grew from their heads in beautiful patterns of red, yellow, and blue. Their faces were long with sharp teeth, but their eyes looked intelligent. Each creature wore a belt made of carved bone and carried tools. Some had spears, others had nets, and one carried a staff with symbols carved into it. They moved with purpose, like they were hunting something. Elena tried to back away quietly, but her foot caught on a root. She fell backward with a loud crash, breaking several branches. The alien creatures spun around immediately, their feathered crests rising up in alarm. One of them, larger than the others with darker scales, let out a series of clicks and hisses. The others spread out in a circle around Elena. She held up her hands to show she was not dangerous. "Please," she said, even, though she knew they could not understand her. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. My ship crashed." The largest alien stepped closer. He had scars across his snout and arms, and his crest feathers were tipped with silver. He looked at Elena with eyes like golden jewels. He said something in a deep, rumbling voice to the others. 2 of the aliens came forward with a net made of glowing vines. The vines pulsed with soft blue light, like tiny electric wires. Elena tried to run, but she was still dizzy from the crash. They threw the net over her, and immediately she felt weak and sleepy. "Bioelectric restraints," she mumbled as her vision blurred. "Smart." When Elena woke up, she was being carried through the jungle on a pole, tied up like a hunting prize. Her hands were bound with the same glowing vines. She could move a little, but the vines made her feel tired whenever she struggled too much. The alien creatures moved through the jungle with amazing skill. They used ropes and pulleys to swing from tree to tree when the ground became too swampy. Elena watched in fascination as they worked together, communicating with clicks, whistles, and hand gestures. The largest one, who seemed to be their leader, kept looking back at Elena with curiosity. He would click something to the others, and they would click back. Elena wished her translator was working. She caught one word that they kept repeating: Scythen. It sounded important. As they traveled, Elena noticed more about these creatures. Their tools were not primitive at all. The ropes they used were perfectly braided and incredibly strong. Their spears had metal points that looked hand-forged. The carvings on their belts and weapons showed complex patterns and symbols. They're more advanced than they look, Elena thought. After several hours, they reached the edge of a cliff. Elena gasped when she saw their village. It was built right into the cliff face with wooden platforms connected by rope bridges. Dozens of the aliens moved around the platforms, going about their daily work. They used a system of pulleys to lift Elena up to the main platform. More aliens gathered around to look at her. The females were slightly smaller than the males, with brighter feathers and more elaborate patterns on their scales. The children had tiny crests and made chirping sounds like baby birds. Elena was placed in a cage made of woven branches. The cage was well built and comfortable, with soft leaves for bedding and a bowl of water. Through the bars, she could see the aliens going about their lives. They worked with wood and stone, made pottery, and tended to small gardens growing on the cliff platforms. One alien was different from the others. She was tall and elegant, with pure white feathers streaked with gold. Her scales were lighter than the others, almost silver. She wore a necklace of polished stones and carried a staff topped with a crystal that caught the sunlight. This alien approached Elena's cage slowly. Her golden eyes studied Elena with intelligence and curiosity. She did not look hungry or threatening. She looked interested. The white-feathered alien spoke in a softer voice than the others. The sounds were still clicks and hisses, but they were gentler, almost musical. She pointed to herself and said, "Nithara." Elena understood. This was the alien's name. She pointed to herself and said, "Elena." Nithara repeated the name carefully. "Elena." She seemed pleased that she could make the sounds. The leader who had captured Elena came over. His feathers bristled as he talked to Nithara. Elena could tell they were having an argument, even without understanding their words. He kept pointing at Elena and making eating motions with his hands and teeth. Elena's stomach dropped. They wanted to cook her, but Nithara held up her hand and shook her head firmly. She said something that made the leader back down, though he did not look happy about it. Nithara turned back to Elena and made calming gestures. As the sun began to set, Elena heard disturbing sounds from the village, the scraping of metal being sharpened, the movement of heavy stones. Through the bars of her cage, she could see aliens preparing what looked like a large cooking pit in the center of the main platform. Elena's heart raced. Nithara had stopped them for now, but for how long? When darkness fell, Nithara returned. She carried an oil lamp that cast dancing shadows on the cliff walls. In her other hand, she held something that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. It was a flat stone tablet covered with carved symbols. But these were not random scratches. Elena recognized mathematical formulas, star charts, navigation symbols, and in the center of the tablet was a carving that looked remarkably like a human figure standing next to the same reptilian aliens. Nithara held up the tablet so Elena could see it clearly in the lamplight. The alien priestess looked directly into Elena's eyes and spoke one word that Elena's broken translator actually managed to pick up and display on its cracked screen. Starwalker. Elena stared at the tablet in shock. Somehow, impossibly, humans had been to this planet before, long ago, and these aliens remembered. Nithara set the tablet down carefully and walked away, leaving Elena alone with this earth-shaking discovery. In the distance, Elena could hear the sound of knives being sharpened and the crackling of a growing fire. Tomorrow, she would either make the greatest discovery in human history or become dinner for a tribe of aliens who might once have been humanity's friends. Part 2. The ancient mystery Elena could not sleep. She kept staring at the stone tablet that Nithara had left near her cage. Even in the dim moonlight, she could see the carved symbols clearly. The mathematical equations were definitely human in style. The star charts showed constellations that she recognized from Earth's night sky. But how was this possible? Humans had only been exploring this part of space for 50 years. The tablet looked ancient, thousands of years old at least. When the sun rose, Elena watched the village come to life. The aliens moved with purpose, preparing for what she feared would be her last day. She saw them gathering wood for a large fire. Others sharpened long cooking knives and cleaned metal pots big enough to hold a human. The scarred leader, who she had started thinking of as Hunt Chief, directed the preparations. He kept pointing at Elena and making gestures that needed no translation. Elena tried not to think about becoming their breakfast. Nithara appeared as the morning light grew stronger. The white-feathered priestess carried more stone tablets, each one covered with symbols and pictures. She set them down outside Elena's cage and began arranging them in a specific pattern. Elena's broken translator flickered to life occasionally, catching a few words here and there. Ancient, sky, teacher, lost. The device was too damaged to give her complete sentences, but even these fragments were exciting. Nithara pointed to the first tablet, then to Elena, then to the sky. She repeated this gesture several times until Elena nodded to show she understood. The priestess was asking if Elena came from the stars. Yes, Elena said clearly, pointing up at the sky. I come from the stars. Nithara's golden eyes widened. She clicked excitedly and called to some of the other aliens. A small crowd gathered around Elena's cage, all chattering in their musical language. The priestess picked up another tablet. This one showed pictures of the Star Walker teaching the aliens how to grow crops. Elena could see drawings of plants arranged in neat rows, irrigation channels, and aliens learning to use farming tools. Another tablet showed the Star Walker pointing at the night sky, while aliens watched and learned. There were drawings of the moon in different phases and star patterns marked with careful precision. Elena felt her heart racing. These weren't just random visitors from space. These were teachers, explorers who had stayed long enough to help this civilization develop agriculture and astronomy. They had cared about these people. Nithara showed Elena a tablet with mathematical equations. Elena recognized them immediately. Basic engineering formulas for calculating load-bearing, strength, and rope tension. That explained how the aliens could build their amazing cliff village and pulley systems. My people, Elena said slowly, pointing to herself, then to the tablets. My people were here before. Nithara nodded eagerly. She spoke rapidly to the gathered crowd, gesturing between Elena and the tablets. Elena could tell the priestess was explaining her theory to the others, but not everyone was convinced. Hunt Chief pushed through the crowd, his feathers bristling with anger. He grabbed one of the tablets and shook it at Nithara, speaking in harsh, sharp clicks. Elena didn't need a translator to understand his argument, just because Elena looked. Like the figures on the tablets didn't prove anything. Hunt Chief pointed at Elena, then made eating motions again. He argued loudly with Nithara, while the other aliens watched nervously. Elena could see the village dividing into two groups, those who believed Nithara's theory and those who sided with Hunt Chief. Nithara remained calm during the argument. When Hunt Chief finished shouting, she walked over to Elena's cage with a determined expression. She pointed to the night sky tablet again, then made questioning gestures. Elena understood. Nithara wanted her to prove she was really a Star Walker, like the ancient visitors. But how could she do that with a broken translator and no equipment? Then Elena had an idea. She pointed to the ground and made drawing motions with her finger. Nithara nodded and brought Elena a stick and a patch of smooth dirt. Elena began drawing in the dirt. First, she drew the solar system, a large circle for the sun, then smaller circles for the planets in their correct positions. She pointed to the third planet and said, "Earth, my home." The aliens murmured with interest. Several of them had seen these same symbols on their ancient tablets. Next, Elena drew star patterns. She sketched out the Big Dipper, Orion's Belt, and the Southern Cross, constellations that would be visible from this planet at certain times of year. She showed how the stars moved across the sky during different seasons. Nithara became very excited. She brought another tablet that showed the same star patterns Elena had drawn. The match was perfect, but Elena wasn't finished. She drew mathematical equations in the dirt. The Pythagorean theorem, the formula for calculating a circle's area, and basic physics equations. Each symbol matched the carvings on the ancient tablets exactly. The crowd of aliens grew quiet as they realized what they were seeing. Elena wasn't just copying the tablets, she was demonstrating the same knowledge that their legendary teachers had possessed. Hunt Chief looked troubled. He spoke more quietly now, but Elena could tell he still had doubts. He pointed at Elena's drawings, then at the tablets, then made gestures that suggested she might be clever enough to simply copy what she saw. Nithara thought for a moment, then disappeared into what looked like a temple carved into the cliff. Face. She returned carrying something that made Elena gasp, a piece of metal that was definitely human technology. It was badly corroded and covered in alien decorations, but Elena recognized the basic design of an old-style navigation computer. The priestess held up the device and spoke urgently to Hunt Chief. Elena could guess what she was saying. "Look, this proves the Star Walkers were real. They left this behind." Elena examined the device more closely. It was ancient, much older than any human technology she knew about. The design was primitive compared to modern equipment, but definitely human in origin. Someone had been here a very long time ago. Hunt Chief was beginning to look less certain. Other aliens crowded around to see the old device and Elena's drawings. They compared the symbols and whispered among themselves. Then something happened. That changed everything. A young alien came running into the village, clicking frantically and pointing at the sky. Everyone looked up to see a bright spot moving across the morning sky, too fast to be a moon, too bright to be a star. It was a spaceship. Elena felt a mixture of hope and fear. Was it a human rescue ship looking for her? Or was it something else? Nithara quickly gathered up her tablets and the ancient device. She spoke rapidly to Hunt Chief, who suddenly looked very worried. Elena's translator caught a few words. Sky fire, big, danger. The aliens began moving with urgent purpose. Elena could tell something was terribly wrong. This wasn't a rescue ship they were seeing. It was a threat. Hunt Chief barked orders to his warriors. They grabbed weapons and began organizing defensive positions. But Elena could see the fear in their eyes. Whatever was coming, they had faced it before and barely survived. Nithara came to Elena's cage with a grim expression. She looked up at the approaching ship, then back at Elena. In broken words that Elena's damaged translator could barely decode, she managed to communicate a chilling message. Sky hunters come. Take our people. Make them slaves. Elena's blood ran cold. She recognized the ship design now that it was closer. It wasn't human at all. It was a hegemony collective vessel, one of the most feared raider fleets in known space. They specialized in attacking primitive worlds, stealing resources, and enslaving the populations. The collective didn't just kill their victims. They captured them and forced them to work in terrible conditions on mining worlds and factory ships. Elena had studied reports of their attacks. Entire civilizations had vanished without a trace. Hunt Chief approached Elena's cage with a completely different expression than before. The anger and hunger were gone, replaced by desperate calculation. He spoke urgently to Nithara, gesturing, between Elena and the approaching ship. Nithara nodded and turned to Elena. Using gestures and the few words her translator could manage, she conveyed Hunt Chief's question. "You know sky hunters? You help us fight?" Elena looked at the approaching collective ship, then at the frightened faces of the aliens around her. These people had been preparing to cook her for breakfast just an hour ago, but now they were facing something much worse than one hungry human. She thought about the ancient tablets, the evidence of humans who had once helped this civilization grow and learn. Maybe it was time for humans to help them again. Elena nodded firmly. "Yes, I help you fight." Nithara immediately began unlocking Elena's cage. As the glowing vine restraints fell away, Elena felt her strength returning. She stepped out of the cage as a free woman, no longer a prisoner, but an ally. Hunt Chief extended his clawed hand to Elena, in what was clearly a gesture of alliance. Elena shook it, feeling the strength and determination in his grip. The Hegemony collective ship was getting closer, its dark hull blocking out part of the sky. Elena estimated they had maybe 2 hours before it reached the planet's surface. "We need to get ready," Elena said, even though she knew they couldn't understand all her words. "They're going to try to capture everyone. But maybe, if we work together, we can stop them." Part 3. The Real Threat. Elena stood on the cliff platform, watching the dark ship grow larger in the sky. Her heart pounded as she recognized the ugly, angular design. The Hegemony collective ships looked like flying fortresses, all weapons and armor with no beauty or grace. "This is bad," she muttered to herself. "Really bad." Nithara and Hunt Chief gathered around Elena, their golden eyes full of questions. The entire village buzzed with nervous energy as aliens prepared weapons and secured their homes. Children were being moved to safer locations deeper in the cliff caves. Elena tried to use hand gestures and her broken translator to explain what they were facing. She pointed at the ship, then made grabbing motions with her hands. "They take people. Make them work as slaves." Nithara's white feathers bristled with anger. She spoke rapidly to Hunt Chief, who translated for the other warriors. Elena heard fear in their voices, but also determination. "You've seen them before," Elena said, studying their reactions. It wasn't a question. Hunt Chief nodded grimly. He pointed to several empty platforms around the village, then made sweeping gestures that suggested people being taken away. Elena's translator caught fragments. "Many seasons ago. Took youngest, never returned." Elena felt sick. The collective had already raided this world before. They had stolen the strongest and smartest members of the tribe, leaving behind only the very old and very young. But this community had survived somehow and rebuilt. "How did you escape last time?" Elena asked. Nithara led Elena to the edge of the platform and pointed down. Far below, Elena could see the entrance to caves that tunneled deep into the cliff. The priestess made hiding gestures and pointed to the caves. "Smart," Elena said. "But this time will be different. They have better scanners now. Heat sensors that can find people hiding underground." She needed to think fast. Elena had studied collective tactics during her xenology training. They always followed the same pattern: orbital scan to locate population centers, atmospheric entry. With gunships, massive show of force to terrify the locals, then systematic capture of anyone useful. "We can't just hide," Elena told them. "We need to fight back in a way they won't expect." Hunt Chief showed Elena their weapons: spears, nets, and bows made from local materials. They were well crafted but primitive compared to collective energy. Weapons and powered armor. Not those weapons, Elena said, gesturing around the village. Your real weapons are your knowledge of this world. Elena began drawing in the dirt again, this time showing the collective's standard attack pattern. She drew the ship landing, troops spreading out in formation, and prisoners being marched to transport vessels. They always do the same thing, she explained. Always. That means we can predict them and set traps. Nithara brought out more of the ancient tablets. Elena studied them with new eyes, looking for anything that might help them fight. One tablet showed the cliff village from above, with detailed markings of all the cave entrances and tunnel connections. This is perfect, Elena said excitedly. Look, your ancestors mapped out every passage in this cliff system. We can use the tunnels to move around without being seen. Another tablet showed something even more interesting. Drawings of the aliens using ropes and pulleys to move huge stones. Elena realized the ancient Star Walkers had taught them advanced engineering techniques. You can move rocks? Elena asked, making lifting gestures. Hunt Chief puffed up with pride. He called several warriors over and led Elena to a demonstration area. Using a complex system of ropes, wooden levers, and pulleys, 6 aliens working together lifted a stone that must have weighed several tons. Elena's mind raced with possibilities. We can use this. When their ships land, we drop rocks on them, create barriers, block their escape routes. She began sketching a battle plan in the dirt. The aliens crowded around, clicking excitedly as they understood her strategy. Elena pointed to different positions around the village and assigned roles to different groups. You, she said to Hunt Chief, take your best warriors to the high caves. When the ships land, you drop stones to trap them. She turned to Nithara. You know all the tunnel entrances. You guide the families to safety, but also position fighters at key points. Elena studied the tactical situation more carefully. The collective would expect frightened primitives who would either run in panic or charge blindly at superior firepower. They wouldn't expect coordinated resistance using terrain. Advantages. We need to make them think they're winning at first, Elena explained. Let them land safely. Let them spread out looking for prisoners. Then we hit them from all sides at once. A younger alien ran up to them, pointing excitedly at the sky. The collective ship was much closer now, its dark shadow falling across the jungle. Elena could see smaller shapes detaching from the main vessel, landing craft heading for the surface. It's starting, Elena said. Everyone to positions. Hunt Chief barked orders in the alien language. Warriors grabbed their weapons and disappeared into hidden passages. Families with children moved deeper into the cave system, following routes that Nithara had marked for them. Elena found herself moving with Nithara toward an observation point high up on the cliff face. From here, they could see the entire valley and coordinate the defense. The first collective landing craft touched down in a clearing about a mile from the village. Elena watched through a pair of ancient binoculars that Nithara had found in the temple. The technology was old, but still functional. 12 soldiers in the first wave, Elena reported. Standard assault configuration, energy weapons, body armor, scanning equipment. More ships landed. Elena counted 48 collective troops total, a significant force for raiding a primitive village, but not enough if they got caught in the aliens' trap. The collective commander, easily identified by his more elaborate armor, began directing his troops. They moved in standard formation, scouts ahead, main force in the center, heavy weapons in the rear. They were heading straight for the cliff village, just as Elena had predicted. They're so predictable, Elena murmured. Nithara clicked softly beside her. Elena's translator caught one word. Ready. Elena nodded. All around the cliff, she could see glimpses of alien warriors in position. Hunt Chief's stone-dropping teams were hidden above the main approach route. Other fighters waited in concealed positions along the narrow paths leading up to the village. The collective troops reached the base of the cliff and began climbing the carved steps toward the village platforms. They moved confidently, weapons, ready but not expecting serious resistance. Elena watched the lead scout reach the first platform. He looked around at the empty buildings and spoke into his communication device. Elena couldn't hear his words, but his body language suggested confusion. Where was everyone? More troops reached the platform level and began spreading out to search the buildings. They found signs of recent habitation. Still warm cooking fires, half-eaten meals, tools left scattered around. But no people. The collective commander arrived and began shouting orders. Elena could see his frustration even from a distance. His scanners should have detected the heat signatures of hundreds of aliens, but the readings were confused by the complex cave system and thermal vents in the cliff. Now, Elena whispered. Nithara let out a piercing cry that echoed across the cliff face. It was the signal they had agreed upon. Suddenly, the empty platforms came alive with action. Hunt Chief's teams released their carefully positioned rocks, sending tons of stone crashing down onto the main approach route. The collective's retreat was cut off. At the same time, alien warriors emerged from hidden positions all around the village. They didn't attack the soldiers directly. That would have been suicide against superior weapons. Instead, they targeted equipment and communication gear. Nets made of bioelectric vines flew through the air, shorting out collective scanners and weapons. Alien archers fired arrows with special tips that Elena had helped them design. Not to kill, but to damage armor joints and weapon power cells. The collective troops found themselves surrounded, confused, and partially disarmed. Their commander tried to contact the orbiting ship for support, but his communication array had been destroyed by a perfectly aimed rock from above. Elena watched with satisfaction as the alien tactics worked exactly as planned. The collective soldiers were trained to fight other high-tech armies, not guerrilla fighters who used the environment as their weapon, but Elena knew this was just the beginning. The troops on the ground were only the first wave. When the orbiting ship realized something was wrong, they would send reinforcements, or worse, they might decide to just destroy the entire area from orbit. We need to move fast, Elena told Nithara. Capture their equipment and find a way to contact their ship. Nithara nodded and began giving orders to the other aliens. Elena watched as Hunt Chief's warriors systematically surrounded the confused collective troops. Using their nets and ropes, they were actually managing to capture soldiers alive. Elena smiled grimly. The Hegemony Collective had come to this world expecting easy prey. Instead, they had walked into a trap set by some of the most resourceful beings Elena had ever encountered. But as Elena looked up at the large ship still orbiting overhead, she knew their real challenge was just beginning. They had won the first battle, but the war was far from over. Part 4. The ancient gift Elena climbed down from the observation point as the battle ended. The cliff platforms were littered with damaged collective equipment, but no one had been seriously hurt. Hunt Chief's warriors had captured 12 enemy soldiers alive using their nets and ropes. Incredible, Elena said, as she watched the aliens efficiently disarm their prisoners. You actually did it. But her excitement faded quickly when she looked up at the sky. The collective mothership was still there, a dark shape against the blue sky. Soon they would realize their ground team was in trouble. Nithara approached Elena carrying one of the captured communication devices. It was sparking and damaged, but Elena could see it might still work with some repairs. Can you fix? Nithara asked in broken English, holding up the device. Elena examined it carefully. The bioelectric nets had fried most of the circuits, but the main transmitter looked intact. Maybe. But even if I can fix it, what then? We can't fight a starship with ropes and rocks. Hunt Chief joined them, his golden eyes bright with victory. But Elena could see the worry beneath his pride. He pointed to the sky and made explosive gestures, clearly understanding the threat above. Elena's translator caught fragments of their conversation. Skyfire. Burn everything. Nowhere to hide. You're right, Elena said grimly. When they can't contact their ground team, they'll start shooting at the village from orbit. We need a better plan. Nithara suddenly grabbed Elena's arm, her white feathers rising with excitement. She spoke rapidly to Hunt Chief, then gestured for Elena to follow her. What is it? Elena asked as Nithara led her toward the temple carved into the cliff face. Inside the temple, ancient tablets covered every wall. But Nithara ignored these and led Elena to the very back, where a section of the wall looked different from the rest. Instead of carved stone, this area was made of smooth metal that gleamed despite its age. Nithara placed her hands on specific symbols carved around the metal section. Elena heard a soft humming sound, and the metal wall began to slide aside, revealing a hidden passage. Starwalker door, Nithara said simply. Only open for Starwalkers. Elena's heart raced as they entered the passage. The walls here were definitely not natural stone. They were made of the same metal as the door, with lights that glowed softly as they walked past. This was human technology, incredibly old but still functioning. The passage led deep into the cliff, much deeper than Elena had thought possible. After walking for several minutes, they emerged into a vast underground chamber that made Elena gasp in amazement. It was a hangar, and sitting in the center, covered by thousands of years of dust but still recognizable, was a human starship. "Oh, my God," Elena whispered, staring at the ancient vessel. It was unlike any ship design she had seen before, sleeker and more advanced than modern human ships, yet somehow familiar. Nithara watched Elena's reaction with satisfaction. Starwalker skyboat, sleeping long time, waiting for Starwalker to return. Elena approached the ship slowly, hardly believing what she was seeing. The hull was made of materials she didn't recognize, but the basic design was definitely human. There were symbols and markings that looked like ancient versions of human writing systems. "How long has this been here?" Elena asked. Nithara consulted one of her tablets, then held up her hands multiple times. Elena counted carefully. The Priestess was indicating roughly 3,000 years. 3,000 years, Elena repeated in amazement. Humans were here 3,000 years ago. Elena found an access hatch on the side of the ship. To her surprise, it responded to her touch, opening with a soft hiss of escaping air. The interior was dark, but lights began glowing as she stepped inside. The technology was strange, more advanced than anything Elena knew about, yet clearly human in origin. The control panels used symbols that were ancestors of modern human writing. The design philosophy was unmistakably human, even if the specific technology was far beyond what humans had achieved in Elena's time. "This ship is more advanced than anything we have now," Elena said in wonder. "How is that possible?" She began exploring the ship's systems. Most were offline, but the main computer was still functioning. When Elena touched the control panel, text appeared on the screen in ancient human script. Her translator was able to decode some of it. "Welcome, Starwalker," the computer said in an electronic voice that sounded almost human. "Systems have been in hibernation mode for 2,147 standard years. Please identify yourself." Elena Vasquez, xenoanthropologist, human colonial authority, Elena said automatically. "Identity confirmed. Human genetic pattern recognized. Awakening primary systems." Lights began coming on throughout the ship. Elena heard the hum of power systems starting up after millennia of sleep. Status displays showed the condition of various ship components. Elena studied the readouts carefully. The ship's engines were dead. That's probably why it had crashed here so long ago. But many other systems were still functional, including something that made Elena's heart leap with hope. "Planetary defense grid," she read from the display. "Status, offline. Activation requires manual startup sequence." Elena turned to Nithara, who had been watching with fascination. "Your ancestors weren't just teachers. They were protectors. This ship has weapons that can defend the whole planet." But Elena's excitement faded as she read more of the display. The defense system required a massive amount of power to activate, and the ship's main power core was nearly depleted after thousands of years. "Not enough power," Elena muttered, studying the energy readings. "We need another power source." Nithara seemed to understand Elena's frustration. The priestess led her to another part of the ship, where ancient tablets were mounted on the walls. These tablets were different from the ones in the village. They contained technical diagrams and operating instructions. Elena studied the diagrams carefully. They showed the ship's power core, but also something else: connections to the planets, natural energy systems. The ancient humans had tapped into geothermal vents and underground energy sources to supplement the ship's power. "Brilliant," Elena said. "They turned the whole planet into a power source." But as Elena traced the diagrams, she realized the connections had been severed long ago, probably by geological changes or simply the passage of time. To restart the planetary defense system, they would need to reconnect the ship to the planet's energy grid. "This will take time," Elena said. "Time we don't have." As if to emphasize her point, a rumbling sound echoed through the chamber. Elena felt the ground shake slightly. She grabbed Nithara's arm and ran back toward the ship's communication array. The display showed what Elena had feared. The collective mothership was beginning orbital bombardment. They had given up trying to contact their ground team and decided to destroy the village from space. "They're shooting at the village," Elena said urgently. "We need to get everyone deeper into the caves." Nithara was already moving, speaking rapidly into a communication device of her own. Elena heard the urgency in her voice as she warned the village about the incoming attack. But Elena was studying the ship's technical manuals, looking for any way to speed up the power restoration process. The ancient humans had left detailed instructions, but they assumed the person following them would have weeks or months to complete the work. Then Elena noticed something in the diagrams that gave her hope. The power restoration didn't have to be perfect. If she could establish even a partial connection to the planet's energy grid, the ship might have enough power for a limited defense. "It's risky," Elena said to herself, "but it might work." She began frantically working on the ship's power systems, following the ancient instructions as best she could. Nithara helped by running to different parts of the ship to operate manual, controls that Elena couldn't reach alone. The bombardment above was getting worse. Elena could feel the explosions through the solid rock of the cliff. Dust rained down from the ceiling of the chamber. "Almost there," Elena said, sweat dripping down her face as she connected the final power conduit. "Just a few more minutes." But Elena knew they might not have a few more minutes. The collective was systematically destroying everything on the surface. Soon they would move on to other targets, or worse, they might decide to crack the planet's crust to get at anyone hiding underground. Elena's hands shook as she made the final connections. Everything depended on whether the ancient human technology would work after 3,000 years of dormancy. "Please work," Elena whispered as she initiated the startup sequence. "Please work." The ship's lights flickered. Power readings climbed slowly on the displays. Elena held her breath as the ancient systems came online one by one. Then, with a deep thrumming sound that Elena felt in her bones, the planetary defense system activated. High above, invisible energy shields began forming. In the planet's upper atmosphere, the collective's bombardment beams struck the shields and scattered harmlessly into space. Elena watched the tactical display with growing excitement. The ancient defense system was working. The planet was protected. But Elena's smile faded as she read the power consumption readings. The shields were draining energy faster than the planet could supply it. At this rate, they had maybe 6 hours before the system failed. 6 hours, Elena said to Nithara. "We've bought ourselves 6 hours. Now, Part 5. Unity and Victory, Elena and Nithara explored deeper into the ancient ship, searching desperately for anything that could help them win permanently. The power readings on Elena's display kept dropping. 5 hours and 30 minutes left before the shields failed. In the ship's deepest section, they found a room that made Elena's breath catch. The walls were covered with star maps showing dozens of solar systems. Each map had markers indicating planets with intelligent life, and many had symbols that looked like the same tablets they had been studying. "Your people weren't alone," Elena said in amazement. "The ancient humans visited many worlds, made friends with many species." Nithara studied the maps with growing excitement. She pointed to several systems and spoke rapidly in her language. Elena's broken translator caught fragments. Stories, legends, Starwalkers helped others too. But Elena's attention was drawn to something else in the room, a large control console covered with symbols she was starting to recognize. These weren't just navigation controls. They were communication controls for something much bigger than one ship. Elena activated the console carefully. Ancient holographic displays flickered to life, showing a three-dimensional map of local space. Elena gasped as she realized what she was looking at. "It's a network," she whispered. "All the worlds the ancient humans visited are connected by some kind of communication system." As Elena studied the display, she began to understand. The ancient humans hadn't just visited individual planets randomly. They had built a defensive alliance, a network of worlds that could help each other when threatened. "Nithara," Elena said excitedly, "what if some of those other worlds still remember? The ancient humans? What if they're still part of this network?" Elena began working with the communication system, trying to understand how it functioned. The technology was incredibly advanced. It seemed to use quantum entanglement to send messages instantly across vast distances. After several minutes of careful work, Elena managed to activate the system. Immediately, signals began coming in from multiple star systems. The display lit up with dozens of active connections. Elena's heart raced as she realized what this meant. The network was still active. Somewhere out there, other worlds that had been helped by ancient humans were still monitoring the communication channels. "Can you help me with this?" Elena asked Nithara, pointing to a section of controls that required 2 people to operate. Working together, Elena and Nithara sent out a distress signal on the ancient network. Elena included her ship's technical specifications and information about the collective attack. She also attached data about the planet's current situation and the failing defense shields. For several long minutes, nothing happened. Elena began to worry that the network was dead after all, or that the other civilizations had forgotten their old alliances. Then the responses started coming in. The first message came from a system 12 light-years away. The translation was rough, but Elena could understand it. "Kythera calls. We answer. Starwalker friends always helped." More messages followed. A bird-like species from one system offered to send their fastest ships. An aquatic civilization promised to share defensive technology. A species of crystalline beings sent mathematical formulas for more efficient shield generators. "They remember," Elena said with tears in her eyes. "After 3,000 years, they still remember the humans who helped them." But Elena's excitement dimmed as she calculated travel times. Even the fastest ships would take weeks to reach Kythera. The defense shields would fail in less than 5 hours. Then Nithara grabbed Elena's arm and pointed to one particular message on the display. This one was different. It showed ships that were already in nearby space. Elena read the message carefully. A species called the Veltar had been monitoring collective movements in this sector. They had 3 warships within 2 hours of Kythera, and they were already heading toward the planet. "Help is coming," Elena said with relief, "but we still need to hold out for 2 more hours." Elena studied the ship's power systems again, looking for any way to extend the shield's operation time. The ancient humans had been brilliant engineers. Surely they had built in some kind of emergency backup system. Then Elena noticed something she had missed before. The power consumption readings showed that the shields were operating at maximum strength, but the collective had stopped their bombardment when the shields first activated. The ships above were just sitting there, probably trying to figure out what was happening. We don't need full power shields, Elena realized. We just need enough to block their sensors. Elena began adjusting the shield configuration, reducing power to areas where no attack was coming and concentrating the remaining energy on sensor blocking. The modifications would make the planet invisible to the collective's scanning equipment. As Elena worked, Nithara studied the ancient tablets more carefully. The priestess made excited clicking sounds and showed Elena a tablet that depicted a ceremony. In the carving, aliens and starwalkers were standing together around some kind of energy source. "What is it?" Elena asked, studying the detailed drawings. Nithara pointed to symbols on the tablet, then to the ship's power systems. Elena's translator managed to decode the general meaning. Together, stronger, combine, power. Elena looked more closely at the tablet. It showed the ancient humans and the aliens working together to operate some kind of energy amplification system. The Starwalkers provided technical knowledge, while the aliens contributed something else. What looked like mental focus or spiritual energy. "Are you saying you can help power the shields?" Elena asked. Nithara nodded eagerly and called to Hunt Chief through her communication device. Soon, dozens of aliens began arriving in the underground chamber. Elena watched in amazement as they arranged themselves around the ship's power core in the same pattern shown on the ancient tablet. The aliens began a rhythmic chanting that seemed to resonate through the entire ship. Elena checked her instruments and couldn't believe what she was seeing. The power readings were actually increasing. Bioelectric amplification, Elena breathed. Your people can somehow focus your natural bioelectricity to boost the ship's power systems. The chanting grew stronger, and Elena watched the shield power stabilize. They now had enough energy to maintain the shields indefinitely, as long as the aliens could continue their ritual. Elena turned her attention back to the communication network. The Veltar ships were getting closer, but Elena wanted to be ready. When they arrived, she began preparing a detailed tactical plan, combining human strategic knowledge with everything she had learned about collective weaknesses. When the Veltar fleet finally arrived, Elena was ready for them. The 3 sleek warships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system and immediately began moving toward Kithara. Elena opened a communication channel to the Veltar flagship. The alien captain appeared on the screen, a tall, graceful being with silver skin and large, intelligent eyes. "This is Captain Zephos of the Veltar Defense Fleet," the alien said in perfect English. "We received your distress call through the ancient network. How can we assist?" Elena quickly explained the situation. The collective ships were trapped in orbit around Kithara, unable to see through the modified shields, but also unable to escape. "Because they didn't know where the planet's defenses were located. We have them in a perfect position for capture," Elena said. "If your ships approach from 3 different angles, we can coordinate with the planetary shields to create a containment field." Captain Zephos smiled. "An elegant solution. The ancient humans always did prefer clever tactics over brute force. The battle that followed was swift and decisive. The Veltar ships, guided by Elena's tactical coordination and protected by the planet's shields, surrounded the collective fleet completely. Faced with superior numbers and no way to escape, the collective commander surrendered without firing a shot. Elena watched from the ancient ship as collective prisoners were transferred to Veltar vessels. Hunt Chief and his warriors had also captured the ground troops, who would face trial for their crimes against multiple civilizations. But the best part came afterward. Captain Zephos requested permission to visit the planet's surface, along with representatives from the other species in the ancient network. Elena found herself standing on the Cliff Village platform, watching as ships from a dozen different worlds landed peacefully in the valley below. "First contact," Elena said to Nithara. but not the kind I ever imagined. The reunion celebration lasted 3 days. Elena watched with joy as the aliens of Kithara met their old allies from across the stars. Languages that had been separated for millennia were joyfully relearned. Technologies were shared freely. Stories and songs were exchanged between species who had never forgotten their ancient friendships. Elena also learned more about the network. The ancient humans had established similar partnerships on dozens of worlds, always helping rather than conquering, always building alliances rather than empires. Many of these partnerships had lasted thousands of years, kept alive by peoples who remembered the kindness of the Star Walkers. On the final day of the celebration, Captain Zephos approached Elena with an offer that took her breath away. "The network needs a human representative," he said, "someone to help